Good afternoon, everyone. Mark and I are planning to share the last 40 seconds of the session because we realize that we're all really running short of time. So the choices are to race through or to just skip what one is, prepared and then just to move on with the flow of the session. Assessments, the bane of everybody's existence. It's a tough thing, you know. I don't know, everybody hates this. Teachers have this cross to bear, you know, that whole thing of assessment lies on the teacher. Really not fair. Sometimes I think we teachers have taken our role too seriously. Time to move on. It's been a very long and arduous journey, and the transition is still on. So moving from conventional assessment practices to continuous and comprehensive evaluation is really taking its time. It's taking its toll on each one of us. When I say us, I'm really talking about the school system at large. But I think CCE has compelled schools to really take a fresh look at the teaching-learning process altogether. And school managements, too, are beginning to modify and relook at so many things that they used to do earlier and try and pump in resources and their energies into supporting their teachers, their children, and so on and so forth. Old classroom practices, teaching strategies, in fact, the very objective of student assessment is being relooked at again and again. I think even the nature of communication with parents, with the children has changed. And we're now moving towards transparency, answerability, diagnosis, remediation, and perhaps trying to become what we've been only talking about, that is truly child-centric. All this is in its infancy right now. And, but nevertheless, at least the first few steps have been taken, and let's hope we can go all the way. I was just trying to link the entire concept of CCE and its goals to Delors' 4 pillars of learning, which he presented in the UNESCO's International Commission, and look at that holistic concept of education that the 4 pillars are really talking about: learning to know, learning to do, learning to live together and with others, and learning to be. And when I see this, I feel that with CCE, we really can convert each of these pillars into the competencies that we wish our children to develop. So when we say learning to do, for example, we're really looking at the productive competency of the child. If you talk about learning to know, the cognitive competency, to live together, the social competencies, and learning to be, which I presume is really very, very important, the personal competency. So when CCE looks at it, and you know, we try and move ahead with the kind of goals that we have when we look at comprehensive and continuous evaluation, I feel that the full spectrum of learning, which is proposed by these 4 pillars, is getting addressed and taken care of if we really try and implement CCE as it was intended to be implemented. Now, in my role as somebody who looks after teachers' training, I get to tour the country. And when I do that, when I tour the country, I am actually exposed to what we are calling best practices. I must admit at the very onset that I'm not trying to say that each school that I visit has all of these good practices going on. Let's be very, very honest with that. Some good practices in one school, one good practice in another. So what I did, because I know that all of you know what CCE is by now, with all our esteemed panelists telling you. So I've just sort of put together a spectrum of some of the best practices that I come across as I travel the length and width and breadth of the country. These practices that I'm touching upon today very briefly are broadly categorized in 3 categories. I've looked at some of the best practices which school managements are having to adapt to CCE. I'm also looking at some of the best practices that I've noticed teachers adapting to, and some, of course, among children themselves. Of course, the ultimate recipient of all of this, I hope, is the child. When I talk about school managements and some of the best practices that I'm beginning to see, and that is so exciting, that enlightened school managements are actually reconsidering the teacher-student ratio. I have come across schools wherein they're actually saying that, look, since the demand on the teacher is much greater, can I bring in more teachers into the classroom, or can I reduce the number of children in this section, and so on and so forth. So that itself is such a breath of fresh air, if that can happen. I have also seen school managements who are looking towards modification in the schedules, in their calendars, and they're actually sitting across the board and trying to bring about certain slots where teachers can meet, reflect, share, things that were unheard of. I mean, we were always rushing from one room to the other. That timetable staring at you, the school bell ringing, there was just no time. Where was the time to sit and reflect? Not even with yourself, leave aside with a colleague. So school managements I have come across, again, few, I wish there were many more, but are looking at and are ready to consider these. A lot of managements are today identifying the real need for teacher training among their staff. Earlier, teacher training was just one thing on their list, and it was part of something that they had to do. You must have 7, 8, or 10, or 12 days of professional development, so I have to just got to put a tick against that list and say, done, you know. But fortunately for us, there are schools and school managements who are taking this seriously. They're actually looking at organizing trainings for their teachers in areas like knowledge and ability, to construct assessment tools that are criterion-based appropriate and are specifically, you know, measuring or assessing some specific parameter. They're also looking for training in comprehensive evaluation of competencies as well as personality traits and attitudes. They're also trying to improve student learning through diagnosis of their performance, and so on and so forth. So many areas of training are coming up now, and those needs are being identified by schools and school managements. They are approaching organizations who can provide that kind of training, and that is such a wonderful thought that school managements are so supportive of this, at least some of them. Also, the huge thing about funds and resources. Managements are beginning to take a serious look at this and wondering where to divert their funds and resources into. Should they look at buying curriculum? Should they look at technology? Should they look at increasing teachers' salaries? Should they look at increasing the number of teachers? Yes, the challenges are huge, and within whatever they have, there are educationists, or let's say there are instructional leaders now who are looking at the hardcore need of classroom transaction first, above other things, and prioritizing where to reallocate funds and resources. That is once again very, very crucial for CCE to become successful. And very importantly, the culture of measuring and monitoring, which the managements themselves are beginning to do and are hoping, in fact, pushing their school principals and teachers subsequently to get on to this task of measuring and monitoring. Measuring and monitoring, if we were to talk about assessment, the assessment plan, the assessment resources, the current assessment activities going on, the evidence, our students learning. Okay, whatever we are doing is fine, but an assessment or evidence of student learning. What to do with that evidence? So data is one thing, but is that being used for anything else? And so on and so forth. So this monitoring and measuring is also something I have begun